Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulina Muhammad al-Amin wa na'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Welcome back to our sessions discussing Javed Ahmed Ghamidi and his counter-narrative, counter-religious narrative with regard to Islam and the state. In the last session, we had gone through a discussion about how the historical events, established history, needs to be understood in a new paradigm, in a new way, and that this new way is in the light of the Quran. And the background to how this started and how this sort of perspective takes shape, in the opinion of Javed Ghamidi, is really in sort of the work of Imam Hamiduddin Farahi. And so we had a discussion about that and sort of what that entailed. In addition to that, we continued to discuss what sort of the need for a counter-narrative is. And part of that was a discussion of the idea of secularism as a potential response to a traditional religious narrative. And what Ghamidi Sahib proposes or says is that actually secularism is a failed endeavor as it relates to Muslim society, that where it's been tried in the past, it just has not been successful. And that in fact, in order to counter the traditional religious narrative, what needs to happen is a counter-religious narrative has to come forward. Or for him, what he believes to be the true narrative of Islam that has been misunderstood over the years. And so he says that this really is the only thing that can cure what ails the Muslim world currently. And that any other route as it relates to removing religion or separating people from religion is bound to fail. And so the article that he wrote, Islam and the State, a Counter-Narrative, takes up this one piece of the religious narrative, that relationship between Islam and the state, and lays out and introduces some of the key ideas of a counter-religious narrative to the general public. So, as we get into it, what his first point in this counter-narrative really revolves around the idea of whether the state has a religion, right? What he says is it's important to understand that Islam's dawah, the sort of message of Islam, is for the individual. That what Islam wishes for, that the religion wishes for, is to inspire, to influence the heart and mind of the individual. In some senses, if you will, it's interested in ruling or sort of conquering hearts and minds, not conquering territory, right? Even when the Islamic faith gives rules for society, in actuality, these rules are addressed to individuals who have responsibility over the Muslim collective, right? Now, why does he think it's necessary to say this? Because what he says is that the question arises, right, at this time, that the relationship between religion and the modern state continues to be an incredibly pressing issue. And part of that is related to the fact that the traditional religious narrative considers Islam's message to be one addressed to the state, right? But what Ghamidi says is part of this requires us examining the Muslim past and understanding that the Muslim past, and frankly the world's past, is completely different from what it is today. Right? In responding to critiques of his ideas on the counter-narrative, he explains that, listen, there are various types of state structures and states that have existed. One type was what we found in the Arabian Gulf in the past. And in some respects, this was quite a unique structure, right? Because in Ghamdi's view, God made a decision 4,000 some years ago that this area of the world is going to be one that he's going to give special significance to, right? So that when Ibrahim leaves to go to Babel, he's told that one portion of his progeny, the Bani Ishaq or Bani Ismail, have them populate Canaan or Bani Ismail, right? And that the Palestine God takes for his own and says that this is my land. And he explains this in the Torah. And that the other progeny, the Bani Ismail, Ghamidi Sahib says, is given the Arabian Gulf, the Khalij, as specific to them, right? The Jazeera over there. And many Muslim scholars today, in critiquing Ghamdi's counter-narrative, have said that this idea that God has designated certain lands to certain people, as sort of prophetic progeny, is completely new. And it's never been said before. But what Ghamdi points out is that actually this isn't the case. In fact, he says, if you look at Shah Waliullah's chapter on jihad, in his famous treatise, Hujjat al-Balagha, that he actually notes this distinction, notes this idea that essentially divides the world up between areas where Muslims have power over others, and he doesn't imagine a place where Muslims don't have power. But then the other land, he said, is where only Muslims can exist, in the Arabian Gulf. In other words, what Ghamdi is saying is that there's certain areas that God has designated to be purified, right? Arabian Gulf being one. And God tells Ibrahim to settle one of his sons, Ismail, in this land, and that it would be perpetually inhabited by his progeny. In fact, Ghamdi Sahib says that people have not understood the dream that Ibrahim saw, in which he's told to sacrifice his son, was not meant to be taken literally, but simply conveying the message that one of his sons must be sacrificed to the task of populating this land where the Bayt Allah, the house of God, the Kaaba, would be built. It was never meant to be an actual sacrifice. The purpose of the dream, just like the purpose of the dream that was seen by the Prophet Yusuf, with regard to his brothers arriving, but seen in moons and stars, etc., that it was conveying something else, right? And the fact is, these Bani Ismail did, after Ibrahim, continue to populate those lands, even until the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's time. And only then, Ghamdi says, during Muhammad's time, peace be upon him, he comes and he removes idol worship from this area as a means of purifying that space, right? So this is how Ghamdi is understanding this history. That the area, he says, has its own special rules as with regard to it needs to be absent of idol worship, absence of idols there. And this is a place where Muslims will exist and no two religions will exist together here. So in this one respect here, this is a Muslim state where other faiths might visit, but citizenship in essence is reserved for Muslims according to God's law. The only reason that this area has that special distinction is because that is what God has decreed. That does not exist for other places, right? There are other types of states that have existed as well, right? These sort of empires, if you look at the British Empire, if you look at Alexander the Great, if you look at other sort of Muslim states as well. And Ghamdi Sahib says that in order to understand the past, we have to understand that in these most states that have existed previously, the relationships were ones that were between ruler and ruled, right? They're not like our governments today. Borders were determined by fighting and conquest. They would expand and contract on the basis of battle. This is what all empires did, including Muslim empires. Some of those people were ruling and others were being ruled. And the debate was not around the rights of these individuals, but the debate was around how to treat the ruled. right? Not that the ruled have any rights per se, right? But that they should still be treated in a particular way, and that's where the debate was. The relationship remained ruler and ruled. This is the relationship that built all empires, the Roman Empire, Sasanian Empire, the various Indian empires, right? These empires are not like the government today. They're governed by a very different type of relationship. And the influence of the British Empire, he says, is still felt around the world today. But the modern nation state is very new, right? It's only come about in the past century or so. And what's unique about it, he says, is that before borders were decided on the basis of conquest and defeat, but now these new states, their borders are determined essentially by treaty, right? By sort of mutual agreement of sorts, or if not mutual agreement, but some type of agreement, right? Some type of treaty. The British and French started to give independence to various parts of their empire and fix their borders, right? And this involved some type of agreement between the parties, between the ruler and the previously ruling and the ruled, right? Even if there was a power imbalance and even if sort of one side had the power concentrated in it, but the nature of it moved away from conquest, right? This period, independence and then post-colonial, et cetera, it moved away from context into a new type of relationship, right? And the underlying principle that was defining these new states was that all its inhabitants or citizens would be equally situated. They would have equal status, right? Now, he talks a little bit about the nation state as well. He said, look, we have to also understand this concept of the nation, this idea of a nation is completely new, that in the past people might identify a particular land as being, you know, their country or their nation, or that they belong to a particular racial or ethnic nation. But this was not really a political reality. The nation state, as it exists today, is completely new, right? And in many respects around the world, it's not just new, right? In many respects around the world, it exists in a way in which it is either fully formed or transitioning to a place where it will be fully formed. Right? So these places are either in a development or transitory stage towards becoming a full type of nation state, or they are already there. Right? And the modern nation state, he says, is essentially the only form of governing polity left. Right? There are some that are not that, but essentially it's not. Right? And because of the nature of the modern nation state, that's how then we start having discussions around sovereignty and rights of states, etc. So, with all this background in mind, the question arises, is there a particular type of state that Islam advocates or Islam says is necessary? And it is with this in mind that Ghamidi has said that in actuality, Islam is addressed to the individual, not to any state. Throughout the Quran and the Hadith corpus, according to Ghamidi, God never addresses anything called the state at all. And this doesn't mean that there's no such thing as a state, but it is simply not the addressee of the Islamic message. And scholars of the Quran, the ones who spend a lot of time with it, know that when God makes this type of omission, then it means that the question of how a state is formed, what rules will govern it, are simply not the subject matter for religion. It is left for the individuals to decide based on their needs. If there are moral or ethical matters that arise with regard to that state and its formation, etc., then those will be addressed by religion, right? Because that is the primary objective. The primary objective of religion is with regard to bringing moral clarity. Islam, he says, addresses the individual, not the state or society, and it's telling them what God's prophet has come to tell them, and it's telling them of what is going to come after this life. In essence, for Ghamidi, Islam is only interested in ruling the hearts and minds of individuals. It is not the objective of Islam to rule any land. That is not its purpose. So when the Quran says in Surah Ikhlas, right? قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ مَلِكِ النَّاسِ إِلَهِ النَّاسِ, right? That the Almighty is the Lord of mankind, the King of mankind, the God of mankind, that kingship, that rule is over us as individuals, not over a piece of territory, right? Some rules, of course, have been given to society, right? And so society, different from the state, right? The state is never addressed. Society has been given certain rules, and these are addressed to the collectivity of individuals, right? And those who have some authority over them as individuals, right? For instance, you have an individual, he says, who's in a forest. And that individual enters into a marital contract with a woman, and they become husband and wife. And then they have kids, and various relationships develop of brother, sister, mother, father. And that family then reaches out for their needs to other people and develops relationships with them with regard to their sort of dietary needs, economic needs, whatever else. And then that leads to a society. And then this also, that society impacts individuals, individuals impact that society. That yes, even in the address that Islam, the Quran has to society, these are also in essence addressed to those individuals who have now taken on certain roles and responsibilities in that society. It is not to society as some separate entity from the individual, right? Likewise, it addresses those who are in the role of governing the affairs of society. They're also addressed as individuals, right? It's not that a state is suddenly being addressed. It is that individuals have taken on new roles, new positions that come with new responsibilities. It is baseless then, in Ghamdi's view, to say that a state has a religion. And here he gives reference to Pakistan as an example because that is his country of origin. And he says, look, we ended up deciding that we are the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. And only Iran has used a similar way to refer to themselves. No other country, he says, in the Muslim world really has this type of reference. Maybe the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, of course, is another example, right? And he says, but this idea that it should be an Islamic Republic of Pakistan, right? Putting in Islamic there, that it's actually Maulana Maududi who pushed forward this idea that the state should essentially read the Shahada, give the kalima, right? That the state must give the testimony of faith. Prior to this, it was only the individual who recited the Shahada, who gave the testimony of faith. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Maududi gave this new idea that the state should also do it. And that this means that Islam has been given a directive that are addressed to the state to push forward its rules. Ghamidi Sahib rejects this idea and says Islam is only addressed to individuals. So what happens here? He says, look, what happened is essentially, once you say that the state must give a testimony of faith, right? Once you have this idea, then you say, all right, the state must convert to Islam. So it has to change its name, right? And that's where then you have the introduction of this idea that, oh, you have to now add Islamic to Pakistan. The state already had a name, Pakistan. And they said, all right, in order to sort of become Islamic, it needed to have that Islamic state added, Islamic Republic added. Likewise, he says then you have in 49 the objectives resolution in Pakistan that stated that the ideology and democratic faith of Islam would be the model for the country, right? Prior to this objectives resolution, right, which started putting in sort of the notion now that the state has converted to Islam, if you will, if you look at that analogy, Ghamidi Sahib says that, in fact, Maududi had a fatwa that stated if anyone was an employee of a government post office, then in fact they were an employee of sort of idolatry, right, of non-religion. He also didn't allow people to participate in the army because, in essence, it was an irreligious or, if you will, idolatrous or satanic, whatever else army, but not a Muslim one. After the conversion of the state through the objectives resolution, then this became allowed, right? But this notion of a state converting was unheard of prior to this, right? Maududi's notion, though, then spreads to places like Iran and then Afghanistan, right? Even arguably the first Islamic religious state, if you will, in 1917, with Ghamidi talks about Muhammad Abdul Wahab toppled the Ottoman governor, gave control to Sultan Abdulaziz bin Saud, right? Even that state that's established there is Al-Mamlaka, Al-Arabiya, Al-Saudiya. There's no Islamic there. There's also no republic there, but there's no Islamic there. Even though it is the first kind of Islamic religious government, one that actually says its constitution is the Quran and Sunnah. Prior to this, the Abbasids, the Umayyads, right? None included the word Islamic in their title. It's Maududi's idea that the state must convert to Islam, in a sense. Now, if the state is to convert to Islam, there's an act of reading the Shahada as well. And this is the process of the objectives resolution. That is the state, the parliament, through its passage of this resolution, reading the Shahada, right? Falls in line with Maududi's basic principle, right? In his article on the counter-narrative, Javed Ghamidi states that this is a baseless idea, that it is baseless to think that a state has a religion, that it needs to be Islamicized, or even that it has to be constitutionally bound to not have laws that are repugnant to the Quran and Sunnah. But all three things were done in Pakistan. It was named the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. It was made to recite the kalima with the objectives resolution. And then it said, now that you're a Muslim, the state cannot do anything against the Quran or Sunnah. The idea of the state being Islamic was in fact revolutionary, right? Ghamidi says when he presented these ideas, all the criticism that he's got, when he brought this forward, all the criticism that he's gotten in response simply presents directives that are aimed at individuals or those governing over Muslims. But there is no directive that anyone has been able to find that is addressed to the state, neither from the Quran nor the Hadith corpus, right? But Maududi Sahib's influence was so strong that letting go of the idea that the state must have a religion has proven to be very difficult. As a result, this idea has gained widespread acceptance, has created a permanent distinction within the concept of a nation state. Within one type of nation state that is accepted everywhere, that there's equal citizenship, whereas another one where a message has been given to non-Muslim inhabitants, right, that they are essentially second-class citizens. When the state reads the Shahada and is now an Islamic republic, and no law repugnant to the Quran and Sunnah can exist there, then you have made non-Muslim and second-class citizens. And Ghamidi says everyone understands this. Everyone has understood this. Only, he says, Dr. Israr Ahmed has been bold enough and had the courage to state this openly, right? Now, as a result of this then, he says the status of these non-Muslims who are second-class citizens is essentially as a protected minority. The equal status concept within the nation state is finished in this new distinct model of nation state, where it's an Islamic republic. The only way that they can gain their rights is by appealing to the real owners of the state who have placed them in this second-class status. In essence, what Ghamidi is saying is that the ruler-rule dynamic is carried over into the nation-state context. Despite all the denials, that is essentially what this is. That these individuals, these non-Muslims, if you create a state, a nation-state, which is required to be an Islamic republic, to convert to Islam, then the status of those who are not within the faith becomes second-class. They become protected minorities. They only gain rights by appealing to the real owners of the state, the real rulers of the state. And for Ghamidi, this is deeply problematic, even though he says no one is willing to openly admit this except for a few individuals. In the next session, we'll continue on this and get to the other points, the second and third points that Ghamidi Saab brings up. Wa akhir ad-dawa, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.